There's nothing really left for us here, bro. It's just a PvP server with a bunch of, fake alpha bros trying to buy a Lambo. If you were lucky when you were younger, your parents would have tried to shelter you from the reality of the PvP-ness. By now you've figured out that there's a pretty concerted effort to keep you in that state, to keep you selfish, to keep you hating others, to keep you, wanting. It could be so different. And, I don't know if older people have just kind of lost their youth and lost their imagination for a world that could be better. Everybody's kind of sunk into this almost pseudo-nihilistic realism now, where they're like, that's just the way it is. Nobody's really trying to put lipstick on the pig anymore. They're just admitting it's a pig and asking if you want bacon. Not only that, but if you are one of the ones who realize that it could be better and see any different way it could be better, you kind of end up in this little nihilistic spiral where you're seeing all the issues and you're seeing possible solutions and nobody really seems to give a shit. You're all like, wow, are these people just misandrists? They want us to doom spiral into oblivion? Buddy, it doesn't make any sense how we're working so much more and have such better technology and things are harder to get. That doesn't make any sense. For people to say, you're young or you don't really understand how it works when you say that, they're blinded by the PvP nature of this all. But the world we were born into has the necessities free. They're free, but you need the skills to use them in any meaningful way. And our school system doesn't teach us one, a good way to play in the PvP server. You're sitting there learning quadratic formula while, you have no idea how to file your taxes. That's a classic one. But even further than taxes, you don't really know how to craft, the persona necessary to succeed in the world out there in school. Nor do you learn the natural skills of how to live life without needing to get a full-time job and work a crazy, 60-hour work week just to keep a roof over your head. They don't teach you anything in there anymore. I'd like to think they used to teach you. They certainly teach you like how to be on time. And I guess they provide an area for kids to socialize in. But most of those kids are psychopaths anyway, and it's not really their fault. They're too young to be held accountable for their actions in this little prison they're placed in for 8 hours a day, Poor kids, man. Could have been better for us. At least I see it now. And I haven't stumbled down the nihilistic spiral that realization brings you. I certainly have a few times, but you see that, like, the land that we build our houses on is free, but the rent is crazy expensive. How's that possible? Well, it's the buildings on the land. Okay, well, how hard are they to build? How many of them do we have? Are they really worth, this much money? No, of course not. Of course not. They're not worth this much money. So what's inflating their value? Well, it's manipulation. Because people who know how to play PvP are taking advantage of the people who don't. And that's why we're sitting here renting for $2,000 a month, while they're drifting off in a yacht somewhere. Or food. The biggest thing that gets me is that an apple, right, has 6 seeds in it. Out of those 6 seeds, potentially 6 apple trees will grow out of those 6 seeds. Thousands of apples out of one apple. And out of all the apples on all those apple trees grow countless more apple trees with countless more apples. The food is free, G. The food is free. The land is free. We were all just born here. You think because somebody's daddy's daddy fought somebody for it in fucking 1502, it's theirs forever now? Hell no, dude. They don't get to claim it. Just like, I'm sympathetic to the Native Americans or, the Western Native population saying we're on their land. Because technically, yeah, we took it from them. They took it from somebody else before that. It doesn't make any sense why, we're just... See, the counter argument to the Native argument is that that's just what happens. Why is that what just happens? Why do we have to accept that humans behave that way? Why do we have to accept that we're being taken advantage of? The only solution to being taken advantage of offered by anybody is just to be better at taking advantage of other people. Just a bunch of misandrists fucking around. I don't get it, dude. It could be so much better. It could be so much easier than this. And like, I'm working on videos. I'd love to go through all the different ways that it could be better or easier. But in reality, like, any of the economic systems you've looked at, any of the systems of government you've looked at, any of the societal structures you've looked at could work if everybody was high trust and generous. But nobody's generous and nobody's high trust because it's PvP. This is the issue, man. We're against one another. I have no idea why, dude. We could not be. You know, these are like survival instincts from ages ago, I guess. But aren't we smart enough for that now? You know, we have all this technology, yet we're still PvP. How does that work, dude? How does that work? You know, thank God, you know, my parents sheltered me for a little bit when I was a kid, so I got to experience the world as it should have been. You know, I had friends, I had a tree fort, you know, I had a stream, you know, we had a big backyard, we had a forest. Man, I was so lucky because I got to experience the world as it was when I was a kid. And then you grow up and realize, man, like, does nobody else realize this? Is nobody else paying attention? You know, it doesn't have to be this way. So to me, it's the power of the idea. And to me, that's the power of the internet. You know, the power of the internet is to connect with people, to, you know, remind everybody, to remind myself, to remind you watching that, you know, it doesn't have to be this way. And I'm not advocating for a certain way for it to be. It's like path of least resistance. You just follow the structure and the system that's already set up here. You were born into this world. This is how it already worked, you know? So you might as well just go along with it, try to get good enough at something to make enough money to, you know, afford your own place. But dude, you only get one life here. You only get one time to do this life on Earth, and you're spending it as an insurance broker? Dude, you're denying claims with your one chance at life, bro. And I get it. Like, I know why you take those jobs. I know why everybody takes the jobs that they take other than passion jobs, is just to make enough money, you know? Or it's something that they're good at. You know, you're decent at it, so you might as well do it for cash so you can afford to, just go back to work the next day? You can afford to wake up, you know, well-rested, brush your teeth, comb your hair, and then go back to work just so you can go back home to wake up, to brush your teeth, to comb your hair. Dude, it makes no sense, you know? But people have to be able to zoom out. People have to be able to zoom out of their life and see why it makes no sense, that it makes no sense, be angry, be like distraught about it, not fall into a nihilistic doom spiral, and then start sharing these ideas. You know, this is our path forward. The education system is absolute dog shit. They know nothing, right? They know nothing, you know? We have to educate ourselves. Anyway, I appreciate you watching. I appreciate the 60 subscribers I have, you know, for sticking around, for being here, for watching my videos, for listening. You know, I hope you're talking about it too with your friends and family and everything else. I appreciate you watching. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.